Welcome back to Matt's Digital Odyssey. This is it, our Season 1 finale. Over the past 9 episodes, I've explored everything from gaming consoles to the truth about digital ownership. And today, we're wrapping it all up with a special episode. I'm your host, Matt Marlatt, and with me I have two avid gamers.
Hi, I'm Chris from Makopowered Gaming, and I have been gaming most of my life, so much so that now I teach about it. I wrote my PhD dissertation on the Resident Evil series, and in addition to teaching video game studies and game design at the university level, I just finished teaching a course on the Grand Theft Auto games.
Awesome. My name's Dustin. I am a middle-aged man who has 42 years worth of gaming experience under his belt. I used to run a podcast myself called Nerd Effect. It was a really fun podcast that I just did with my buddies to kind of make an excuse for us to hang out, because once you become a dad, time becomes limited. And it ended up going really well, and we ended up interviewing a bunch of really cool people.
Being a dad is a fun thing, especially when you're trying to be a gamer and a dad at the same time. And the topic today is our all-time favorite games. I'm sure there's going to be some agreements, but there's probably going to be some questionable choices. Well, from me mostly. So I'm going to kick off with my favorite game of all time, Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. So the game is just so much fun. You get all these different ways to kill your enemies, powerful upgrades, virtually no loading times when it was on the PS1, but the Dreamcast version was my personal favorite. It just felt like a definitive to enjoying Nosgoth. So much so that I'm playing it way too much in my Series X. So what's your favorite game, Chris?
My favorite game of all time is the original Metal Gear Solid. That game had a profound impact on me. It is not just genre defining, it is medium defining.
It wasn't one of those games that I bought on PS1 right away. I had to borrow my brother's copy, and I didn't give it back for 3 months.
I got mine on Boxing Day, 1998. There was Metal Gear Solid, there was Gran Turismo, there was Abe's Exodus.
Oh, I love the Abe games. They're so good.
They're so good. I got Ocarina of Time for Christmas. I played through Metal Gear Solid 3 times before I touched Ocarina of Time.
Wow. I mean, I totally understand because the first Metal Gear Solid, it was just like, whoa. I had played Metal Gear on the NES and I thought, this is okay. And then when I heard rumblings of when they were developing Metal Gear Solid, it was just like, this is a movie.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, more than just being an action movie, it's what Kojima does with the medium and with our preconceived notions of the medium. Everyone talks about the whole Psycho Mantis sequence, but all that is setting you up for the actual fourth wall breaking. After you've defeated Metal Gear and Liquid is telling you about everything and talking about how he's been watching Snake moving through the entire game, killing his comrades.
Yep.
Yep. Liquid is not talking to Snake.
Nope.
That entire sequence is presented in first person, so Liquid is looking at the player and talking about the player, which is designed to make you question why you're finding enjoyment in playing war. It's a military game with an overtly anti-military stance. All of the Metal Gear Solid, all of the Metal Gear games are.
Absolutely. Metal Gear Solid is defining. I don't know how many copies of that game I own, how many copies I have owned, how many times I've played through it. All right, Dustin, what is your all-time favorite game?
As far as my favorite game goes, because it seems like you guys wanting to start off with all time, and I had to really kind of dig into this. The list I put together, I kind of dug through all the different systems as I was kind of growing up from kid to adulthood. And honest to God, even though it's a more recent game, it is my absolute favorite game of all time, and that's the Horizon series, Horizon Zero Dawn and Forbidden West. And that game is phenomenal, especially when it comes to the voice acting in it. You got Ashley Birch, who has done a lot of voice acting, and then R.I.P. Lance Reddick.
Lance Reddick, yep.
Who was a phenomenal voice actor for that game as well. And just the idea of the game from front to back, it always felt really cool to me that like there was this. You don't really know much from the trailer when you see it. You just know that what's happening is that there's humans. They've basically gone tribal, but they're still rolling around with like futuristic technology. And you kind of, as you're playing in the game, you start to understand how basically humanity had to be rebooted at one point. And I like that as a concept for a game is absolutely bananas. Like just thinking about how that happens. I think the reason that game touches really well is because it's something in gaming over the course of, I would say, of the last 10 to 15 years that to me felt like hadn't been done before. And it's always been something that, as a PlayStation fanboy, has always, it gives me great joy to actually be able to play that game.
Okay, you have totally sold me, Dustin.
I can't recommend it enough, and it can get a little grindy that way without much story progression. But as you do actually progress through the story, it hooks you.
All right, I am definitely going to check it out. I need to boot up my PS4 more often. So I'm going to jump into my second one because this is a game, I want to say I've probably purchased this game 9 times throughout the course of my entire lifetime, on collections, on singles, on digital versions. But it means so much to me because I just have such fond memories, is Sonic the Hedgehog 2. It's
Mm-hmm.
the game that came with my Sega Genesis. I played that game religiously from beginning to end every time I could. So Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is my number 2. How about you, Chris?
Okay, so I'm going to stick with the PlayStation for now. A lot of my favorite games are going to be like, I love Mario 64. I love Castlevania. Except we're going to go with...
Go out out of the
I'm
box
with
a
you though.
little bit.
I tried to pick things that weren't of the normal ilk of games out there.
Mhm.
Like, but I'm with you on that one. So yeah, go ahead. I'm interested to see what you have to say.
But I'm going to go with a JRPG that does still fly under the radar, even though it got a PS1 Classics release on the PS3 store. More people need to play Parasite Eve.
Oh,
I love Parasite Eve. For those of you who don't know, it is, I can't even call it an action RPG. It's a survival horror RPG that it actually acts as the sequel to a best-selling Japanese novel. It takes place in the modern day. It takes place in the real world. So it's across 7 days in New York between Christmas and New Year, and it uses legitimate scientific concepts in order to create its body horror.
Mhm.
The original novel was written by a biochemist. And so all of the discussion of mitochondria, cell division, all of that is legit. And it's just spun out into using this information to create body horror monsters, rats that turn into giant skin ripping monsters.
I know. I see what you're saying. I totally understand it. I remember the first time I saw that first opening cinematic, and I
Oh,
went, "What is this game?"
and the music for the game as a whole, it and another one of the games I'm going to mention later,
Mm,
got me through my MA. Like I would
mm.
have the soundtracks for that, for Parasite Eve and the upcoming game on repeat while I was reading, while I was working, and it kept me sane.
Mhm.
But the combat mechanics where you are able to move around freely and then you have a range grid when you're ready to attack, the story, which for a while there, because of when it was set, I would play Parasite Eve every year at Christmas. That's
specifically at Christmas.
yep,
That was my Soul Reaver situation. It was the game I play at Christmas time. It's just that Christmas game. I get it.
It's just
yep,
like your annual comfort food.
yeah,
Yeah,
pretty much.
100%.
For me, it's Metal Gear Solid and Parasite Eve at Christmas.
Yep, I
I
get
mean, I
it.
don't disagree with that. Parasite Eve, and it's funny. I'm glad that you actually brought that game up because it totally was just out of my brain. And my experience with RPGs is not great. But Parasite Eve was like, it was just different. It was something that like it really popped out. It tapped into the survival horror thing, which I really enjoyed. And I got really apprehensive. I was like, I know this is going to be an RPG, and I didn't know if I was going to like it or not. And then I got into it. I was like, oh my god, I have free will. And and then so just having the, even though it was kind of turn based, like you said, it was kind of an open combat situation where you could run around and kind of get out of range if you needed to, or and you could base your strategy on where you're at in the battlefield. So I always did like that about that game.
And
Yeah.
the thing is, as well, it doesn't overstay its welcome. It is not like a sprawling 50-hour RPG or what.
Mm-hmm.
It is actually surprisingly tight storytelling, setting aside the EV modes, 80 floors of the Chrysler building, where it's not required, but if you want the real ending, gotta set your nose to the grindstone. But even so, it is what, say 15 hours.
Yeah, for an RPG, that's really solid, actually.
Yeah, the storytelling is not overly bloated. It's quick paced. And there's so much to love about that game. It didn't get as much love when it came out. It's actually funny. I've been reading old game magazines that I've dredged up with my move,
Mm.
and seeing the reviews for Parasite Eve, they're like, "Oh, it's an RPG, but it's not a long RPG, so I don't know if anyone's going to be satisfied. It's survival horror, but it doesn't play like Resident Evil. I don't know if anyone's going to be satisfied."
Mm.
Yes, people will be satisfied. Stop shitting on it.
I'm ready to be judged, because from anyone listening to this podcast and you guys, I will first start off by saying my revisit to Parasite Eve was a perfectly enjoyable one, and I love that game. But my first exposure, I was not ready to experience what it really was. I had just freshly come off Metal Gear Solid. I wanted another action game. So when I bought Parasite Eve, I started playing and I went, okay, I get this. And then the combat was introduced, and it was really, really hard for me to get into it. So much so that I went down to a game store and traded it in for, oh, I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud, Fifth Element for the PS1.
Oh no,
Shame
this is
on
almost
you. Shame on your
Mhm.
family.
Mhm. That's why I have to go back and say that about 5, 6 years ago, I bought it on PS1 digitally and absolutely loved the experience, and really, really regret that decision. So I apologize to anyone that loves that game, because I love that game now, and past Matt was a dumbass.
good. This is almost as bad as your Rugrats in Paris story.
I know. Maybe I'll get into that one too, but we'll have to see.
Look, I mean, are you really a gamer if you haven't made a horrible trade before?
How about how about you, Dustin? What is your absolutely second, your number two on your list?
You know, and hearing all this stuff, I kind of like, I want to, again, my list is just more of like an impact list, not necessarily an absolute number two
Oh,
list.
I'll be completely honest. For me to come up with a top 10 was very, very hard.
Yeah, it gets really rough. That's kind of why I decided like to do like one from like at least from different consoles that I had played along the line, just like because I feel like they all deserve at least a fair pull.
I agree.
And I guess if we want to go number two,
Mm.
I got two here that I want to poke at, but I'm not sure which one to go with. I'll start with this. We'll dial it back since we talked about Sega Genesis once already.
Mhm. Mhm.
Is Beyond Oasis.
Oh, Beyond
I don't know if that's a
Oasis
game
is
that you guys
such
have
a
played or heard
fun
of.
game.
Yep.
It was basically, in my opinion, it was a direct competitor to Legend of Zelda, and it finally kind of brought that action adventure kind of top down style element to the Sega Genesis that really hadn't been there before,
Mhm.
at least in my opinion. So, and it was really cool because you play this prince who found a gauntlet on an island, and you could interact with different elementals along the way. Like you get a guy named Ifrit who's like a flame god, and he has flame powers, and then there's a water sprite and all this other stuff that kind of help you on your adventure along the way. And then you end up by the end of the game, you're fighting this opposing darker wizard type force who has the other opposing gauntlet, the silver one, and it kind of ends on that note. He's the Ganon of this story, so it's really cool. And I think I played Beyond Oasis at least 5 or 6 times on the Genesis just because it was that good.
It felt like a Legend of Zelda competitor. Absolutely. I didn't own it, so I didn't really play it until I got, like, I want to say either the Nintendo Online subscription, or it might be on one of like the Genesis minis or whatnot. But when finally digging into that game,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, so great. All right, our number threes, and I think like anyone that knows me just knows Crazy Taxi. I fucking love Crazy Taxi to no end. The over the top ridiculousness, the drivers, just the concept of driving to someone, picking them up, them hopping in the back of your taxi, driving them somewhere, and then being like, hey, that was really cool, and diving back out, and just the arcadey feel. And Crazy Taxi 2 has a slightly higher edge for me, just because the drivers and the city and being able to like do that crazy hop and jump over things.
I remember games of that generation, kind of a little more choppy, kind of a little more graphic intense, but for some reason, the Crazy Taxi games always played like butter.
Yep. There's only one spot, and I know it every time on the Dreamcast version. It's when you do one jump, the game lags just for a slight moment. The rest of the game is so buttery smooth. and the soundtrack and the licensing. Hey, drive me to the Pizza Hut. Like, come on. It's so fun. All right, Chris, what's your number 3? I'm curious.
Okay, so I wasn't actually going through these in order of ranking, but because if I were,
Mhm.
this would have been my number 2 and Parasite Eve would have been my number 3. I have to go with Chrono Trigger.
Oh, yes.
Specifically Chrono Trigger on the DS. It is the
Really?
definitive version of it is the definitive version of the game because you get all of the Akira Toriyama
Mm.
sequences without
Mhm.
any of the lag from the PS1 version. Plus, the presentation is perfect.
Oh,
Instead of having to pause to go into a menu, you've got the menus on the touch screen while you've got the game on the upper screen. You can navigate everything without any sort of hindrance or pause or delay. And it is just the best version of one of the best games ever made.
that game is beautiful. The music, even for a Super Nintendo game, was just epic.
That soundtrack, along with the Parasite Eve soundtrack, got me through my MA. Chrono
Mhm.
Trigger on repeat. I went out and got the Japanese 3 CD release of it. It's actually sitting behind me right now.
That is epic. Oh my god. Yes, Chrono Trigger is absolutely one of those ones. It's not on my list, but I love it to no end. I didn't own a Super Nintendo. I was a Sega guy, and then I finally got a Super Nintendo emulator running on my Dreamcast. And that is how I experienced Chrono Trigger, playing it on a Sega system.
Nice.
Isn't that hilarious? So
I was
from
just saying the
beginning to
system
end.
didn't just blow up.
All right, Dustin, what would you say is your number 3?
My number 3, I'm going to go with the Dead Space series. Uh,
All right, good
I,
one. Yep.
I'm a big fan of survival horror games, which is surprising since I haven't mentioned one up to this point. But I like Dead Space because it was something that, again, being a fan of survival horror, something on that level hadn't been, or that particular type of horror hadn't been touched on yet. But it's like if Resident Evil and Alien had a baby, like that's kind of the game that you would have, and you follow the main protagonist through basically trying to figure out what happened, what sort of supernatural thing is causing all these mutations in the crew, and it's kind of got a very almost Silent Hill vibe as you're
Mhm.
playing through the game, just with way more action because you got some really fun weapons to play with in that game, and the stompy effect is always really fun because you go around and stomp on everything. There was something about that series that I really loved. Again, one of the few games that I was able to actually sit down, take the time, and play through. I played the first and second one, and then the third didn't quite have the same vibes as the first two did. But just the psychological aspect of it, the
Mm.
fact that I'm forgetting the lead protagonist's name. All of a sudden, it's
Isaac
like
Clarke.
Isaac,
Isaac.
yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Hmm.
Is constantly going through like a mental anguish throughout
Oh,
the
his
entire
his his
game.
brain is getting broken the entire
Yeah.
time because this is another one of those games where, oh my god, what I really okay. In most games, you shoot them in the head, they're down. No, you shoot them in the head, they get pissed and they run at you with their sharp arm blades.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Yeah.
have to shoot off all their limbs first and then stomp them dead.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I thought was really, really cool was the first game, you had your regular silent protagonist. He's going through, he's killing all this stuff. And then they amped it up to the second one and gave him a personality. Like they did the complete opposite of what Halo did. Let's just take his helmet off, and here he's an actual person underneath this suit.
Yep.
Great job.
Okay, so I know I can already picture the looks I'm going to get for this.
I'm the one that's going to be judged for my stuff. Your stuff's going to be tame.
So I really like Dead Space 2.
Mhm.
Dead Space 1, I was actually kind of tepid towards because, hear me out, I have enough experience with horror as a genre,
Mhm.
horror film, and all. I could tell where everything was going to go, where
Mhm.
all the monster closets were, where all the jump scares were, where the plot was going. I love the idea of the derelict spaceship as haunted house. That's
Mhm.
great. But I sat there calling every beat of the story, which is particularly frustrating
Mhm.
considering it's a Warren Ellis written story. Dead Space 2, yes, you can still call
Mhm.
those beats, but because it's not just a mining ship, it shows the effects on
Mhm.
a civilian population.
Mhm.
It has much more of an effect. And as you said, they gave Isaac Clarke a personality.
Yes, I completely agree. Dead Space. It was something fresh. It was something new. For my number 4, it's Mortal Kombat 2. and the arcade version. And the reason for that is I just have so many memories of going to my local pizza place, plunking in a quarter because they had it set up in the lobby while you're waiting for your pizza. And every time I played that game, no one beat me at Mortal Kombat 2. I would then take my pizza and walk out. I love Mortal Kombat 2 so much. I love all the Mortal Kombat games, even some of the ones that are kind of meh. It's always been such a great experience. The lore, the characters, and everything. The fact that I love it just so much, I had to have my own custom Mortal Kombat arcade built. So that's my number 4.
Oh, yeah. I still love Mortal Kombat 2. I might have lost the Nintendo Power issue where it lists all of the moves and fatalities that I
You're
just
supposed to
made.
you're supposed to memorize that shit, man. All
Nintendo
the
Power gave it
fatalities,
cheat.
you
Why would
keep
I
it in your
memorize when I
head.
can just have it? But no, seriously, like back in the day, I remember wanting the Super Nintendo game so badly until the 32X, which I never had a 32X, but
Oh,
until
the
the 32X,
32X version was so good. I
yeah.
mean, the only
And
one that was slightly better was for PC. It ran on DOS, which sucked, but it was arcade perfect.
yeah, like I'm a console gamer, so
Me too.
there is that. And no offense to the Genesis, and that version is perfectly adequate. But if we're comparing the Genesis to the Super Nintendo editions, the Super Nintendo edition just wiped the floor with it. I'm sorry.
Back in the day, I would have been like them's fighting words. The Genesis version is the best, and now being an adult and having both, like,
We
no,
had
it
blood
really
mode,
wasn't.
goddammit.
That was for the first one. The
I know.
first one is still so much more epic. Mortal Kombat 2. Oh, yeah, no.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, Chris, what would be your number 4?
Okay. So it's like, oh, I like Nintendo games. I have to include a Metroid, but much as I love Super Metroid, much as I recognize its superlative 2D gameplay, my favorite Metroid is Metroid Prime.
Okay, I
It
can see that.
it nails the atmosphere. It nails the music, both in terms of original pieces and homages to the series. And on top of all of that, and this is what puts it over the edge, it has the original Metroid embedded in it. So not only do you get the best of the new, and Metroid Prime has aged perfectly. You know this because of what happened with the Metroid Prime remaster when it first came out, and everyone went nuts for it. The only change they made to that remaster is the fact that the Switch has 2 usable analog sticks.
Yep, absolutely.
And that I think they might have removed the original Metroid, but
Oh,
when
they
those
might
are
have.
the only changes you need to make and then just making sure it's running in HD, you know you've got a game that is aged gracefully. Yep.
I completely agree. Like Metroid Prime, I think I played it when it came out on the GameCube a little bit, but I didn't really dig into it until I did get it on the Switch, and I went, "Wow, this game is epic." When is Metroid Prime 2 coming out? I want that game.
If they do a Metroid Prime 2 remaster, which I hope they do, I hope what they do with it though
Mhm.
is the Wind Waker HD treatment,
Mhm.
because a lot of the backtracking in Prime 2 is
Yeah.
the same as the backtracking in Wind Waker, and nobody's got time for that.
No, we have families, we have jobs, we have responsibilities. Come on, guys.
That's what I've been saying. I
Yep,
can't.
exactly.
I was like, I'm a dad, man. I can't. Only got so much
Yep.
time.
Me too. I need to be able to play games in like hour bursts.
Yep. That's why fighting
Yeah.
games and stuff and just in mission based, like you can do at least pick it up and work on it for 20 minutes and put it down and not have to worry about losing progress.
Exactly. How about you, Dustin? What's your number 4?
I might save the one that the little psychological one I had for number 5 because I can almost guarantee neither of you have it on your list. But what I will do for number 4 is do a callback to kind of what got me like really into video games, and that was the old days of the arcades. And the one arcade that meant the most to me as a kid was the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game.
Yes.
and
Yes.
and
So epic.
and I have the OG arcade game in my apartment as we speak because it was like my one big thing. I saw that as a kid, and I told myself, I was like, when I become an adult, I'm gonna own that. And sure, when I was like 25 years old, and I ordered that shit off eBay for $1,700 and had it shipped from New Jersey to Boise, Idaho.
Oh,
And
Yes.
And I, to this day, I'm just gonna say, bury me in it. Turn it into my casket. I'm a huge fan of beat 'em ups like Ninja Turtles, X Men, Double Dragon, that genre. Streets of Rage. Like I love a good beat 'em up. It doesn't even have to be heavily story driven, as long as like the hit detection is solid and you got good power ups. Like it doesn't take much. They're mindless and they just are good fun with a lot of people too, especially if you got a good multiplayer one that really brings people together shoulder to shoulder at the arcades, like quintessential to that experience. But the TMNT like was the game. It was at the time what was Showbiz Pizza before it got bought out by Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah. In terms of the Chuck E. Cheese, that is what you played when you went to Chuck E. Cheese in Winnipeg as a kid.
Nice, yes.
Yeah, there's the ball pit. There's a bunch of other like mechanical games, but
Come
four
on, you got
player.
TMNT. Let's go.
Mhm.
Exactly. I also have a very specific story about TMNT Arcade, because when I was a kid, there was a dingy little arcade tucked into a corner called Pirate's Den. And they had a Ninja Turtles arcade cabinet. And my mom decided, you know what? We're going to beat this game. $20 worth of quarters later.
I was gonna say it's a quarter eater.
We almost got there. We were almost at the Technodrome.
Oh, that Technodrome. I'm going to go to my number 5 because I've been itching to get at it. It's Silent Hill Shattered Memories. I love the Silent Hill games. I first got the original Silent Hill on PS1 when it first came out, one of the first games that got like almost, and I don't think I have been so scared of a game until I started playing more modern horror games. So the first Silent Hill, loved it. Then when I picked up Shattered Memories and it was in a reimagining of the original, but then that psychological profiling and the adaptive storytelling and just making your Harry different from someone else's was just amazing. It's my number 5. I love Shattered Memories, Silent Hill so much.
Okay, have you played the Wii version?
I have. I love the motion controls for that one.
Okay, because talking to Tom Hewlett, the director for the game,
Mhm.
he said that it was designed with the Wii in mind.
Mhm.
There are so many little things that you kind of lose with the PS2 version, which
It's true. Like you have to jiggle the analog stick and there's a couple other little weird things, but I was so into that story, I did not care.
well, okay, I don't know if it's the same for the PS2 version, but when I was playing through the Wii version, I learned that every single phone number in that game
Mhm.
works in that game.
Mhm. They do. Yep.
So everything scrawled on a wall, everything written on a flyer. If you pull up Harry's phone and dial
Mhm.
it, you will either get lore, tips
Mhm.
for the game,
Mhm.
or funny little interludes that help to break some of the tension.
Yes, it's the same in the PS2. You see a phone number, you can call it.
And it's interesting seeing how many people just shit on that game because it's not a quote unquote traditional Silent Hill, when it's doing
It's doing the
just as,
same things.
yeah, it does so much that the original Silent Hill games did in terms
Mhm.
of experimenting with format, dealing with the psychology behind horror, not just jump scares.
Mhm.
And the twist at the end is brilliant.
That was the moment I said, okay, I love Silent Hill. Shattered Memories is so much better than that game. Not just graphically, not just control wise, but story wise.
And between her story and Shattered Memories, it made me a lifelong fan of Sam Barlow. I follow him on Twitter, and yeah, Shattered Memories is just so good.
What is your number 5, Chris?
Okay, so I know how I talked about the psychology of Shattered Memories, and we're going back to the PlayStation, and I can't not include a game from this series, but I have to go with Resident Evil 2.
Yep, I agree.
One in particular,
I will agree.
like I love the remake. The remake's great, but it doesn't capture the magic of the original.
Mhm.
Just the way in which it took a standard haunted house narrative from the first game and turned it into a full-blown zombie apocalypse.
Mhm.
The dynamics between the characters, the zapping system, the introduction of Mr. X. Hot take, that game is peak Resident Evil.
I would agree with that, but it also gave you
I would totally agree with that.
it also gave you two games in one too, because you get to play as both
Mhm.
Leon and Claire.
It
Yeah.
gives you 4 games in one.
Like, 'cause there's
Oh, do you get to play as Tofu?
That's where Tofu was introduced, as
That's what
well
I
as
thought.
Hunk.
Yes. Oh yeah, Hunk.
So you get Claire, you get Leon, you get the B scenario for Claire and Leon, you
Mhm.
get the 4th survivor, and you get wait, I think Tofu the 4th survivor?
Just
Hunk.
remember seeing it, thinking it was an April Fool's Day joke.
And it wasn't.
All right, Dustin, what is your number 5?
My number 5, I actually just want to throw out there real quick too, as like another honorable
Go for it.
mention, because I almost brought it up because you were talking about Silent Hill Shattered Memories. I didn't truly add it to my list because it wasn't technically a full game; it was technically a demo. But that was
Yes, I love
Oh,
PT.
and it just the reveal at the end of it, with
Mhm.
Silent Hills potentially being a game, and then Konami and Kojima having a bit of a fallout, and it
and
just was not a good situation to be in there towards the end.
I remember when that came out, first of all, when most people didn't know what it was, and that the internet was trying to figure out how to beat the game.
Hmm.
That was such a unique situation where everyone's like, how did you get to this next part? I don't know. I yelled into my microphone.
Yeah, it's basically Kojima being a goddamn genius.
Kojima being Kojima, and then you had Norman Reedus and Guillermo del Toro.
Guillermo del Toro, I would have
Three.
loved to see his
Oh.
ass just absolutely be handed a Silent Hill game if they would just let him do it.
I
Mhm,
feel so bad for Del Toro. He has tried over and over
mhm,
and over again to make a horror video game, and
mhm.
something always happens.
Something always happens. It's so unfortunate because PT, first of all, was just literally terrifying.
It was
Like, go
marketing
ahead.
genius, is what it was. Like,
It was marketing genius, and I love that game so, so much. And the minute that you're just like, "Oh my gosh, this hallway's looping over and over again," and then you go through it and there's a baby screaming and a fridge flying above your head, like, "What is fucking happening right now?"
the one last thing I'll say about PT though is that I think one of my favorite little things that came out in the last year or two, where somebody finally hacked it and you just find out that the ghost is behind you the entire time.
Oh, yep,
Yes.
yep, yep.
Whether or not that's just for
Mhm.
camera sake or not, just knowing that the ghost is just lurking like 2 feet behind you the entire time you're playing the game is just mind bendy.
Oh, it's amazing because, like, that first time when the ghost rushes you, that's when the model gets stuck to your back. Like, it's just I love it. What is your number 5?
I only brought it up because you talked about Shattered Memories, and I kind of wanted to at least just touch on it as an honorable mention.
That's a
Um,
great honorable mention.
but Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice,
Okay.
it's the craziest game. It won all sorts of awards when it was released on PS4, and it was one of these games that kind of just really pushed the limits to what PS4 is actually capable of. And they used binaural audio to record a lot of the psychosis that was happening in Senua's head throughout the entire game. Because throughout the game, she's constantly listening to voices in her head, and then there's always this one particular male voice that's kind of talking to her through her journey. And the mocap in the game is so crazy how they did it, and that's kind of what got its like big rewards, was how they performed the mocap in this game. And Ninja Theory put the game out, and it's just mind bending. If you're into psychosis and trying to study how the human mind works, there's this woman Senua who basically her entire tribe's been brutally murdered, and she's basically going through her psychosis a revenge mission, but she's fighting like you don't know if they're real or mentally projected gods. So it feels very unique to me. Like I expected it to be very God of War like, but it wasn't. It was very streamlined, very targeted, and very smooth in the aspect of being able to like dodge and attack and stuff like that. It's just such a well done game, and it's one of those games that kind of caught me off guard. I think I bought it for like $20 on sale one day, and I was like, this game is worth every goddamn penny. I would give it more if I could.
Like, that's one of those games that's sitting on my hard drive on my Xbox. I'm like, whatever. And now hearing all that, it makes me say, okay, this game, I have to play it. I didn't realize that it's as deep as that. I guess I didn't know what to expect.
The and I'm really pissed because the sequel's an Xbox exclusive, and
Yes, because
I will
Ninja Theory was purchased by Microsoft.
I will never be able to play it because of that unless I download it on Steam.
I was going to say, hey, don't worry, Xbox is everything right now. Everything's an Xbox. I don't know what that means, but everything's an Xbox. Okay, I can get into my number 6, and it's such a deviation from everything, and it's another one that I know I'm going to be judged on, is Road Rash 3D. I love the Road Rash games. I always have. I always will. The soundtracks, the gameplay, everything was just so fun. But Road Rash 3D is one of the first games I really got to experience on the PS1. And being able to sign up with your own biker gang and all these really weird characters in like FMVs, and then the soundtrack, it was just such a definitive experience. And you could essentially drive from the start to anywhere else in that map that you wanted to, just on a PS1 game. That's pretty awesome.
I was going to say, why Road Rash 3D over the PS1 port of the 3DO Road Rash? Because that game just like captures the brief window of like post Nirvana grunge before shifting to whatever we want to call the sheen of the late 90s was.
I'll
I
give
mean,
the answer to that because I did really like that version of Road Rash. I got to play it on the 3DO, funny enough. But Road Rash 3D was just, I picked it up first, and it was the soundtrack. Sugar Ray, back when they were actually like alt rock, but the Tea Party. And growing up in Toronto as like a teenager, you heard the Tea Party no matter where you went. So being able to hear like Temptation as I'm driving down the road, beating the shit out of people with a chain, that's my jam.
oh man, okay. I will admit I had a similar experience with Wipeout XL. Just like turning a corner at 600 kilometers an hour to I'm a fire starter, twisted fire starter.
And those are those gaming memories that make you just love that game, that you can go back and play it anytime you want, obviously, if
Yeah.
you own it. But if you now have that game in your collection, you can play it anytime and relive those memories. That's the magic of gaming.
Yeah.
All right, I got to ask then, Chris, what's your number 6?
There are a few that I know I want to go with, but it's a matter of ranking them, and
Mhm.
I don't know if I care about ranking them anymore. I have to go with WrestleMania 2000 for the N64.
Yes, I love that game so much.
So
It's so much fun.
it's so much fun, and there's a reason I'm going with WrestleMania 2K out of all of the Aki N64 wrestling games.
Mhm.
So for those of you who are like, why not No
Why not
Mercy?
No Mercy? I know why.
I actually have two reasons for why not No Mercy. One, WrestleMania 2K is a better encapsulation of the Attitude Era.
Yes.
No Mercy starts to bleed into the Ruthless Aggression Era,
Mhm.
and I don't want to say it's less grunge or whatever, but No Mercy was more, we've lost Stone Cold, here's The Rock as replacement.
Mhm.
WrestleMania 2K was, oh shit, we had Stone Cold versus The Rock at WrestleMania. It just feels like a better encapsulation of the Attitude Era.
I can agree with that. It is definitely an encapsulation of that time of watching wrestling and just like The Rock, Stone Cold, Mankind, Chris Jericho. Let's
Yep.
fucking go. Yeah.
WrestleMania 2K was the game, especially considering in terms of presentation, it had the full
Mhm.
entrances. And the first printing of No Mercy was actually recalled. I still have my copy of that because I didn't know about the recall. And so I can't save my game to it because it will erase every single goddamn time.
Oh no. Oh my God.
The funny thing is that makes it significantly more valuable, which is why 2000 is my choice. But yeah, WrestleMania 2K, then, now, forever.
All right, Dustin. I'm gonna have to ask, what is your number 6?
Hmm. I'm
I know this one it gets tough.
yeah, but to call it wrestling games, one of my favorite wrestling games. It's not even really a wrestling game. Was WrestleMania the arcade game where they turned it into a fighter?
Oh,
Yes. It was Mortal Kombat, but with wrestling characters.
Yeah, they never followed up with it either. Like that game had all the recipe to like bring in their entire roster, and it was only like 8 characters that they gave you.
yeah, we have to do this apparently. Matt was the one who said it was like Mortal Kombat.
Mm-hmm.
So that was not the intention. Yes, you've got the combos like Mortal Kombat, but if you look at the interviews with Sal DeVita and Mark Turmel, These were the guys behind NBA Jam, and they wanted to make an NBA Jam version of the WWF.
Missed it by quite a bit there, but I see where they were going.
So that's why there are arguably two follow-ups. One is the, I believe, 96 or 97 WWF In Your House, which was the most direct.
I must have like blocked that from my mind because the minute you said that, the EGM ads popped in my head.
Yeah, this was like Triple H during his Blue Blood era. Gold Dust, the Ultimate Warrior, for the like 5 minutes he had come back before going to WCW and then disappearing. Owen Hart.
It had a pretty good roster, to be honest.
It had a pretty good roster. It's just that because Sculptured Software, the developers for that game, had experience with Mortal Kombat, the ports of Mortal Kombat 2, and Mortal Kombat 3, but this was their first time making an original follow-up. And they did not have all of the resources that Midway had for the arcade game.
No, this looks horrible.
But you had never heard about this one before? You're welcome.
Well, what's funny is I knew of the game. I don't think I've ever actually seen screenshots of the game before, and I'm looking at this going, this is like 16-bit horribleness.
It's the arcade game, but not good. Yep.
And there are animalities, like Vader turns into an actual mastodon.
That kind of makes me want the game just because of that. Like, that's insanity.
Yeah, it is an interesting artifact. It's just not a good game.
As you know, I don't collect games because they're good. I have some really bad games in my collection that one day I may touch on in a podcast.
I'm aware.
Dustin, we have definitely hijacked. What is your number?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm gonna go Castlevania Symphony of the Night, just specifically because that game kind of changed how I looked at. Because I never got really like, I knew of them, I had played them, but none of them really like ever hooked me to the point where I was, again, being a Sega guy, like I never gotten to like Rondo of Blood or anything like that. But for some reason, Symphony of the Night caught my attention, and I rented it from Blockbuster one night, and I couldn't fucking put it down. Like, I was playing it. I think I got clear up to the point where I couldn't really figure it out without some sort of assistance, because I knew at some point the castle was going to be flipped upside down, but I never quite got that far. I just remember just being absolutely hooked on that game. The soundtrack was amazing. Being able to play as Alucard was amazing. Opening with Richter and just absolutely obliterating everything in your path. And I know you get to unlock Richter again once you beat the game. But the whole of the game is pretty awesome. It's one of the first Castlevania games that takes place exclusively just in Dracula's castle. Yeah, that game just kind of changed how I kind of looked at Castlevania, and it made me kind of want to play some of the other ones now, going back and play some of the classics.
That's a good number 6. I love it. All right. So my number 7, it was a really tough one to come up with this one because there's a few in the series. So back in 1995, a little game called Earthworm Jim came out.
I love me some Earthworm
And it's one of those games where you're like, I don't know what I'm getting into. And as soon as you start playing it, you go, what is this game? Okay, weird. And then I got to try the Sega CD version. And the soundtrack and the extra levels and the opening of Jim with the Sega logo, if you haven't seen it, is one of the funniest things of all time. But my number 7 has to be Earthworm Jim 2 on the Saturn. Way more weapons, way more zany humor, but the color palette was just so much more beautiful. And because it was on the Saturn, that soundtrack was epic. But I have to have a small little side to that. Boogerman is also one of my all-time favorites, so it's hard to pick a 7 between the two of those. Okay, Chris, what is your number 7?
Okay, so I love Symphony of the Night. It is a great game. I had a similar experience. Got it, wound up playing it for like 12 hours straight, but it is not my favorite Castlevania. For my number 7, I have to go with Castlevania 3.
It's still fun to this day.
It's still fun. It is hard as balls, though, at least the North American version.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I've never beat that game.
I've made it to the 3rd form of Dracula and then gotten just obliterated. But it's dripping with atmosphere. It offers alternate paths, so you still get that feeling of exploration, even if it doesn't follow the open world format of Castlevania 2 and Symphony of the Night. It is still an absolutely gorgeous game. It pushes the NES to its limit. It is my first experience with Castlevania, and it is still my favorite Castlevania.
And it's still fun, and it's still amazing in 2025. All right, I'm going to have to ask it then, Dustin. What's your number 7?
So I'm a big fan of Twisted Metal series. At the end of the day, I think Twisted Metal Black is what really pushed that series to its perfect point.
Mm-hmm.
It was just absolutely perfectly dark and gritty. It played like butter, unlike some of its PS1 predecessors. But Black, and specifically, it introduced like destructible environments. The first time I remember seeing the Ferris wheel roll down that one level, and was just like, this is Twisted Metal right here. And then also their use of the Rolling Stones painted black for its credits was always a favorite of mine. Just being able to hear that version of it at the end, and then just having it go with what looks like a tattered film strip.
It was very Grindhouse.
Yes, very Grindhouse.
Twisted Metal Black felt like a reimagining of Twisted Metal 2, but also a lot more new elements. Like you said, it's the destructible environments, the characters, all these like backstories to these really weird characters. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're starting to come down to the wire here. So my number 8, which is what made me super, super excited for Sonic the Hedgehog 3 movie, is Sonic Adventure 2. Epic levels, fun soundtracks, a mystery hedgehog that looks like Sonic but isn't, and really cheesy dialogue. I absolutely love Sonic Adventure 2. All right, Chris, what is your number 8?
My number 8 is Panzer Dragoon Orta for the original Xbox.
Yes.
Why isn't it Panzer Dragoon Saga? Because I've never played Panzer Dragoon Saga.
Nobody has. Only people with deep pockets have.
But with Orta, it is a logical extension of the first 2 games. Like, you get the shifting mechanic of Dragoon 2, you get the feel of the original game, and you get the original game. So I can just go with Orta, get a fantastic game, and then get the original as well. I think it is still $10 on the Xbox Marketplace, but the last time I checked, it was still $10. It was fully backwards compatible and is worth every penny.
Absolutely agree with your choice, Chris. Its value is not as expensive, and it is fully backwards compatible on the Series X, so it gives you that upscale to 4K. It controls beautifully. The soundtrack is gorgeous. Panzer Dragoon Orta is a must-play. Dustin, what would you say is your number 8?
It's not that it's a great game. Again, it kind of feels like it was unique in its place amongst others in its genre. But Resistance Fall of Man, and when you first see the initial trailer for it, you're like, oh my god, this is just another World War II FPS. I've seen like 9 of these by now. But what the trailer kind of drops on you is that, oh, now it's World War II with a hostile alien takeover. And you're like, oh, okay, you have my attention. I think you're an American soldier who's working alongside like Russian comrades, and you're using a mix of different traditional human weaponry and alien weaponry at the same time in the same game. So it just made for a very unique experience in that game. I just appreciated that they were like, clearly somebody was like, look, we've seen World War II. Let's do something a little different. And then clearly somebody other development team got really high and said, aliens.
I mean, you can't look at the Katamari Damacy series and not say someone was stoned, okay? Come on.
Oh, look at that. I would say the same thing probably about Silent Hill as well. Somebody was probably just ripped on shrooms and just like, bro.
The worst trip of their life. Okay, I think we're going to dive into number 9. This one was a little tough for me to choose because it was the series overall that I really like. BioShock Infinite is my number 9 pick. As really good as the original BioShock was, I feel this one was one notch just above it because of the time play on it and the twist and having a companion that wasn't useless. I don't know how many times I play games where you're like, why is this person following me that isn't doing anything? Elizabeth is actually throwing me items and doing something. Infinite's my choice, especially with the DLC that loops everything around to the original Bioshock.
And you can still get the collection for fairly cheap these days. I think for like $20.
You can. Okay, Chris, what is your number 9?
Okay, well, it's sitting right in front of me. I have to go with it. Mario 64. It is a defining game. Not only, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that the first time Charles Martinet voices Mario
Yeah.
in a game?
Yep.
Yes, however, there was a moment before that. It was at a Nintendo press release where
Yes.
they needed a 3D model to have a voice, and Charles Martinet did the voice there. This is the first time he did it in a game.
Yes. But that's just another one of the firsts it does, because it defined 3D movement for platformers for multiple generations. I still remember seeing it in those Toys R Us kiosks and still being blown away. And I can still go back to it. Oh, God. It's almost 30 years old, but yeah, turns 30 next year.
Now I'm depressed.
But I can go back and it's just sheer joy.
It was the reason I wanted an N64.
I did a TikTok video not long ago explaining the time variance for the movie The Sandlot. If that movie were to be made today, would take place in 1994.
Dude, what the fuck? We were having
I
fun.
know.
This was a good podcast, and now you brought it
I know,
all
I'm sorry.
down. I don't want to know. I don't want to know your number 9 answer. I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry. Be gentle. I was just saying because we talked about Sonic the Hedgehog a couple of times now. I do love Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and since that's already been brought up, I will say Sonic CD, because Sonic CD
Yes.
was kind of a real push past the Sega Genesis, in my opinion. Like, it still had a lot of the same platformy elements to it, but it kind of brought it into this newer. I don't even know if the Sega CD was really 32-bit or not.
Technically, it was 32.
But it gave it like a dimension. Like when you do the wall runs, it kind of it could parallax the backgrounds and stuff like that. There was elements of time travel, which was really cool. You could play this literally the same mirrored levels, but either in the future or in the past. There was voiceovers, and god damn it, if there didn't have the best opening fucking song to any goddamn game ever made in Sonic Boom. And I was so pissed when they re-released the game, that song was not on it. And I wanted to wreck somebody for me paying money for this and not having Sonic Boom. Like, just having like that opening sequence, like, I would watch it every single time, and every time gave me chills. Like, because it was just such a great opening cinematic for that game. And it introduced Metal Sonic as an antagonist in the game as well.
That boss battle, oh my god.
The race to the end, like, you're racing Metal Sonic, who will absolutely wreck you if he catches up to you. But just like it was just a really good, I think, step for the Sonic franchise at that time. And I just remember playing the hell out of that game as a kid and just loving the soundtrack. You were just jiving to it the whole time. The past soundtrack was always my favorite. Like, whenever you're in the past, it was just always this like cool, like, little jungle beat vibe.
And the slight techno of like the future levels. Yeah.
And it's all dystopian every time in the future. The future is never good. Just the whole thing is fantastic. It's peak Sonic.
Usually it's also included in like compilations. Sometimes Sega will like re-release them as individual games. I'm pretty sure, but I'm not 100% that you can get it on the Switch and the Xbox Series and the PS5, but I'm not 100%.
Yeah, I'm not 100% on that either, to be honest. In fact, I'm definitely not 100% on the PS5, but I know for sure on Steam, because that's how I ended up playing it.
Nice. All right, we've reached pretty much the end, and this one's coming out of left field for me. My number 10 is Fighters Megamix for the Sega Saturn. I could have picked Virtua Fighter. I could have picked Fighting Vipers. I love Saturn fighting games. But Fighters Megamix just is so weird and fun. Let's take Virtua Fighter 2. Let's take Fighting Vipers. Smush them all together, and, for the fun of it, let's also have the car from Daytona be a fighting character. Let's get some Sonic fighters in there. Let's just get the most off-the-wall characters we can think of and put them all in one fighting game together. When have we ever had another epic brawler like that?
Capcom versus SNK.
Exactly. Or Capcom versus Marvel, or Capcom versus another thing that Capcom's fighting. I'm not too sure.
The only time I can think of where it was that over the top, though,
Mhm.
was Street Fighter Cross Tekken.
Thank you. That's the best comparison for sure, because it was definitely over the top. So that was my number 10 pick. How about you, Chris? Anything crazy like that or going safe?
I have to go safe. I've gotten this far without mentioning a comic book game. I have to go with the one that defined not just comic book games, but video game combat systems to this day. Batman Arkham
Mhm.
Asylum, in addition to showing that you can have a good standalone licensed game, it has the
Mhm.
tightest script. Even with that,
Mhm.
even with that last boss, it has, because of that and the fact that it is essentially a Metroidvania rather than an open world game, it has a
Oh.
much more crafted experience. And
I
plus the
didn't
fact
think
that
about it that way. You're right.
And Paul Dini did the writing for Arkham Asylum, and he was only co-writer for Arkham City, which also
Okay.
Arkham City was sprawling, yes, but so was the writing to its detriment. Like, I still enjoyed it. I've still played through Arkham City multiple times, but if I have to play a Batman game, it's going to be Asylum. And here is where I come out of left field: Arkham Origins.
I
It
love Arkham Origins. It doesn't get the love it deserves.
it doesn't. Even without Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill, Troy Baker, and Roger Craig Smith as the Joker and Batman, respectively, are fantastic. It has a great story. It tightens up a lot of the stuff that Arkham City did. Admittedly, it has its problems, and for the love of God, do not play the PC version.
Xbox version is backwards compatible, but you need the disc. It's not available digitally.
There you go. The fact that when they remastered the Arkham games, they did not include Arkham Origins was a crime. But
Absolutely.
at the same time, you cannot go wrong with Arkham Asylum.
I completely agree. The first time playing through that game from beginning to end, you got to feel like Batman. You are Batman. And it's Kevin Conroy. It's Mark Hamill. It's an extension of the animated series, but you're playing it in a video game. Amazing. All right, Dustin, what is your number 10?
Well, I was gonna go safe, like Mario Brothers 3 or Double Dragon 2, which were like two of my favorite NES games of all time.
Great game.
But
Yep.
again, I feel like those just show up on lists all the time, and I don't want to I want to find something that was actually like interesting to me in this case. And then you mentioned the off the wall fighting game, and I was like, oh, one game that I've been advocating for either a sequel or a remake, anything for, is Bloody Roar.
Yes. Where's our updated Bloody Roar? I love those
And I
games.
played the shit out of the first two or three of those games, and I loved them. It was like all the same psychotic storyline that Tekken could bring you, but you now have animal forms. And with modern systems these days, like you could totally create the craziest combat system for a game like that if you really put your effort into it. And there's again, it's the only game that's ever really done anything like that, and nobody's ever followed up with it since.
And I think I found why, but there might be a little hope.
I like Hope.
Hope is
Yes.
good.
Because the original developer was
Yeah,
Hudson
I'm seeing
Soft.
that.
And
Okay.
Hudson Soft was purchased by Konami during the whole pachinko is our future, slot machines are our future. Considering Konami's now doing a 180 and actually putting out games again, maybe, knock on wood.
Fingers crossed, because Bloody Roar 1 and 2 were so much fun. I remember playing the demo and being able to turn into that tiger, and I went, yep, this
Yep.
game's great.
Yeah, Tiger was the way to go for me too. Like the Tiger and the Wolf were both my go-tos. But I think if they really wanted to, they could probably release like HD remakes of both of those. See how they fare in a test market. Like release them digital only. See if they do well. Because every time I bring it up, people are like, "Oh fuck, I love that game.
Hmm.
Whatever happened to that game?" And then it
And then everyone looks it up and realizes
yeah, and
that's
then
why.
it just
Yeah.
never got it just never seemed to get the same love as like the Soul Calibers and the Tekkens of the world. It just whereas and Dead or Alive, like all those games seem to have like really solid staying power, whereas Bloody Roar just kind of came to like a weird screeching halt, and then nobody ever heard from it again.
And that brings us to the end of Season 1 of Matt's Digital Odyssey. It's been an incredible journey, and I couldn't have done it without all of you tuning in, engaging, and sharing your own gaming memories with me. But before we wrap up, I want to give a huge thank you to my guests today, Chris and Dustin. It's been great having you guys on. Is there anything you'd like to talk about today, Chris, before we wrap up?
Thanks. It's been great being here. And if you've found anything I've said interesting, well, first, my dissertation is publicly available from the York University Library website. As well, if you want to check out more of what I talk about, I have a YouTube channel. It's Makopowered Gaming, with the main series, Weekend Rental, looking at games that throughout the history of the medium that are either interesting failures or hidden gems. I love getting feedback. I love discussing these things. So please check it out if this sounds of interest.
Awesome stuff. And Dustin, same to you. Where can people check you what you're up to lately?
I currently have a TikTok channel that has bizarrely blown up. I started it during the pandemic, and just as a way to absolve boredom, because I was laid off at the time due to the pandemic and needed something to have a creative outlet with. So somehow I ended up with about 8,500 followers over the course of that time. And so yeah, you can check me out there, Dustimus_Prime, which is basically where you'll find me pretty much everywhere these days under that moniker.
Thanks again to both of you for being part of the season finale. I couldn't have asked for better guests to help me close out this chapter. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to follow, leave a review, and reach out with your thoughts or suggestions for my next season. What should I tackle? Until then, keep gaming, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and I'll see you in season 2.